What's up, Thrashers, and welcome back once again to the Thrash Maniac 99 YouTube channel, and I am back with yet another album review, and today I am talking about the debut offering from Vile Rites with SENESCENCE. This also came out on August 16th, this time on Carbonized Records, and like I said, debut offering from a new band, and this was described as progressive death metal, and it actually features members of bands like Vector, Mortuous, and Laceration. So this is kind of a supergroup coming together to do progressive death metal. And what's cool about this album is it's produced by Greg Wilkinson from Autopsy, and you know, once you get Greg Wilkinson to do your production, you're in for quite the journey when it comes down to the sonics. And I must say, top to bottom, this is some bonkers progressive death metal. We kick things off with Only Silence Follows, and immediately you're about to be hit in the face with all sorts of insanity. Dark, clean intro to start off to kind of get this album and song off on more of a darker mood. But then it gets into like dissonant, doomy riffs to kind of add more to the darkness that's happening and being brought onto you. But before I continue talking about the songs, probably the big thing that stands out the most about this album, the bass. Because when you have Greg Wilkinson mixing, you're going to be able to hear the bass quite well. And I gotta say, the bass work, top to bottom, across the board on this album, is flawless. It almost reminds me of bands like Cynic and Atheist a little bit, like those kind of borderline jazz fusion inspired bass lines kind of pop up quite a bit on this album, and it definitely gets showcased right away with this opening track. But after you get those little bass flourishes on top of the dissonant doomy riffs, then it goes into hyperspeed with the blasts and the tremolos, very much like Morbid Angel a little bit, but then it does kind of go back and forth between that and some thrash rhythms. And then, of course, pretty much on almost every track on the album, you get like those off-time rhythms to kind of add more to the prog aspect of the album. And it's not just the off-time rhythms that make this album progressive. It's also the song structures. It's not going for verse, chorus, bridge. It's all over the map, which again, I would say that is what progressive music actually is at its core, which is just going for all sorts of different structures, not just verse, chorus, bridge. Like you could do like multiple verses, one chorus, or like multiple choruses and hardly any verses. And this song's just going for mostly verses and maybe a bridge. Because in the middle of the song, you get melodic leads and a dive bomb, but it does turn rather atmospheric. And then, of course, some big triplet chugs. And triplet chugs are quite regular on this album, and they even off-time them a little bit. I would say especially as you get later in the album, like the song Shiftless Wanderings, the triplet chugs are off-timed, which is really cool. And then you get into the title track, Senescent. Strange riff right out of the gate, and it felt like something I would have heard Demolish do. And I will say Demolish is kind of a key influence on this album when it comes down to the bizarre dissonance, and some of the riffs kind of remind me of Demolish a little bit. But then it turns into more lumbering grooves. Then there's blackened tremolos and blasts, because the tremolos are a little more on the high end than the low end on the guitars. Double time, and then of course bass flurries, but again, bass flurries are just everywhere. More off time, and then you get a riff and a rhythm that honestly to me kind of felt like latter era death, like Individual Thought Patterns, Symbolic, Sound of Perseverance, like that kind of style of death a little bit. And then whenever it gets to the lead, it's more shreddy but harmonized, which is really cool. Then Shiftless Wanderings, you get this like clean, dissonant intro that actually kind of reminded me of something Job for a Cowboy would have done on either of the last two albums. Then it gets into like this gnarly riff and blast beat section that I don't even know how to describe it other than just it's gnarly. Then, of course, off-time triplet chugs, but again, more melodic leads. Now, again, the lead work is kind of diverse all over the place. Like, you get harmonies, you get shred, you get melody, you get atmosphere. But what I liked about the ending of this song, clean guitars and the bass come together in perfect harmony. I'm not going to talk about the interlude that follows because it was just a clean interlude. But then you get into Transcendent Putrefaction, which I think is a hell of a title. Bass intro, it's off-timed, and then it turns rather dissonant and groovy. Kind of like, again, similar to Demolish. And that Demolish style of dissonance is felt pretty much all throughout this track. But then it turns doomy again, but then you also get moments where triplet chugs and thrashy rhythms kind of alternate, but it doesn't feel like abrupt transitions. It almost feels like a natural progression. Like you go from like the tappa to and it doesn't feel like it's out of nowhere. And then, of course, synths show up, and synths only show up very briefly on this album, and they feel like big sci-fi cosmic kind of stuff, and it adds to the atmosphere. And then, of course, we get another great harmonizing moment with the clean guitars and the bass providing melody. Then you get into this swing that honestly kind of reminded me of Oppressor a little bit, like off the first album, Solstice of Oppression. It gets into this swing with like clean guitars and the bass flurrying together while the drums is doing their thing. But then you get like dissonant tremolos and blasts and a big triplet chug to bring it all to a close on that track. But then you get to the long track, over 11 minutes, with Banished to Solitude, Adrift on the Infinite Waves. Big double time gallop and angular riffs, again, kind of like Demolish. Triplet chugs and blast beats. The riffs get flat out nasty, like disgusting on here. Chugs and groove all the live long day. Some dissonance pops up here and there, but then you get like riffs that felt like a combination of Morbid Angel and latter era Death once again. But then you do get a nice little sullen, clean melodic break as it leads into the most atmospheric solo on the entire album, and then another bass melody, and then it ends mostly on a doomy note to kind of add more to the darker overtones of this album. So I will say maybe the only thing I can complain about, like a couple of things I can maybe complain about, is that sometimes it gets a little bit too bonkers at times, especially with like some of the angular dissonant riffs that pop up here and there, but they weren't bad at all. It's just maybe they did them just a notch too much. And then, of course, while the production and the mix is great, there are a few times on the album where it feels like the bass does overpower the guitars just a notch. So maybe in those inconsistencies, up the guitars just a tick, and I think it would have been like flawless. But overall, with the songs, these were phenomenal songs. I am going to give this 4 out of 5. This was another great album that came out this weekend, and I hope this project continues, and we'll see where it goes from here. So if you are a fan of Demolish, Void Ceremony, Death, Cynic, check this out. But of course, those are just my opinions. What did you guys think? Let me know in the comments below. Like, comment, share, subscribe, and all that stuff. Thank you for watching. Keep your horns high and your dreams wet.
Thank you for your patronage.